Hello and welcome to Early Years TV with me, Kathy Brodie. Today we are learning about education for sustainable citizenship. I'm delighted to be joined today by an expert in this subject area, Professor John Siraj-Blatchford. Start right at the very beginning. What's the background to sustainable citizenship? Where's this come from?
To really follow this, I think we need to start by thinking about what is sustainable development. And that's an area of thought which developed a great deal in the 1970s and 80s, and I think a lot of the work was carried out in the context of urban development. And if I show you this slide, there are various representations of sustainable development which emphasize the idea of three pillars, three central pillars that make it up: economy, social, cultural aspects, and environmental. And I find the metaphor of a three-legged stool quite useful here, because basically if you don't include all three, it's not sustainable, it doesn't stand up. And to give a concrete example, if you think of a public transport system for a city, if you designed the most economic solution to that, then it would be probably producing quite a lot of pollution, which would be a health problem. It would use up land that should be sustained for environmental reasons, and people may not even want to use it because it's inappropriate for their particular needs. So unless you actually include all three, it just isn't going to work. And so it's a very practical approach that addressed things like health, pollution, housing, public concerns that were actually going on quite commonly. And the kind of examples that you might think about are high-rise housing and things like that, which were found to be rather inappropriate for people's actual use, even though there were huge investments in them at the time. Yeah. On the bottom right corner there, the three pillars sometimes include good governance, because it's widely understood that this isn't just about politicians making decisions, it's about everybody being involved. And good governance means actually involving everyone. Multidisciplinary approaches, but also the public opinion needs to be built in so that solutions are sustainable.
So how does that fit in then with the global sort of aspect? What is global citizenship and where does that fit in?
In terms of the global perspective here, the greatest challenges to sustainable development, things like climate change and biodiversity. We've recently had the World Wildlife Fund reporting on the imminent problems of extinctions of many species. Those challenges can't be addressed individually or nationally even. It really does require a global and international response to those problems. If Harry Potter waved his magic wand and the whole of Britain became carbon neutral tomorrow, or even the whole of Europe, it actually wouldn't solve the problems of global warming. It has to be the whole world, and we have to set a good example to other countries and encourage them to actually make the changes that are required in that. The other thing is, it's not just about governments in across the world. It's about people's own behaviour, as consumers, and our day-to-day behaviour with waste, etc. All of that is significant too. So citizenship and global citizenship are key areas. Now, Dobson's come up with a very simple definition of a sustainable citizen as somebody who displays pro-sustainable behaviour. So if we're talking about education for sustainable citizenship, we're talking about education to change behaviour. It's not just about knowing something, it's about doing something. And in SchemaPlay, we talk about education for sustainable citizenship as a lifelong learning capability. And we've got a very particular way of looking at that, which I'll just run through for a moment, although probably need to spend a bit more time on it. So I want to say something about how SchemaPlay understand education for sustainable citizenship in early childhood, how it actually works. The first thing to say about that is that we see it as an emergent accomplishment, something that takes a whole lifetime, in fact. And in the early stages, we're beginning to identify certain schemes and schemas, certain operations and figurative knowledge that children have that they can draw upon in doing sustainable citizenship. And these are things like being independent, making choices, having agency, recognizing others' feeling states. These are all early understandings that are prerequisites towards defining particular sustainable behaviors. Okay, and there's a whole range of them, and they extend to quite detailed knowledge of different animal species, food chains, etc., geographical features, even to biochemical relationships, their interdependencies, which, as I say, take a whole lifetime for some of us, and we may not achieve much, or may achieve a great deal depending on our motivation. But in the early years, there are some crucial ones that we can identify and see as relevant. Now, because we're looking at it through SchemaPlay, we're emphasizing the role of free-flow play in all of this. And free-flow play, from free-flow play, we know that children quite spontaneously take those competencies they already have, the knowledge and skills that they are already able to draw upon, and they quite spontaneously apply them in different contexts. They try them out to see if they work. And it's in that process that these separate areas of knowledge and understanding, skills, etc., get pulled together into demonstrations of empathy, the exercise of their rights and their responsibilities, and beginning to recognition and action being taken on the basis of interdependence. So empathy is really something that's, as we understand it, hardwired by the very nature of cognition being embodied in the child. This is something that Piaget, I think, well understood the basis of cognition to be, and we increasingly have evidence through neuroscience that recognition of feeling states, for example, is something that actually involves the motor system as well as the perceptive system. Increasingly, these things are pulled together, and at a crucial period where the child begins to self-identify as someone who cares, who actually wants to be a sustainable citizen and join the club, in very much the same way as Frank Smith talked about reading being a club that children wish to learn to join, take on a role in the process by which they learn to read. So the child, in the process of becoming a sustainable citizen, goes through a crucial stage where they actually identify themselves as someone who wants to actually contribute and care about this. And increasingly they continue. And part of our model, a significant part of our model, involves the recognition that this also includes literacy and numeracy, because citizenship requires literacy and numeracy to exercise your rights and responsibilities in modern society. Those things are crucial, and right from the beginning we should take that on board, we believe. So in terms of a definition, SchemaPlay understands the development of capability, in this case sustainable citizenship capability, as something that emerges as children bring together these prerequisite component schemes. They are necessary, but they're not sufficient in themselves to determine the learning outcomes. They're drawn together in the child's mind initially as a complex role, and it's in that role, in that self-identification, that the child's taking the first unique and individual creative act that actually takes them on the way to becoming more and more a sustainable citizenship. And of course this highlights the importance of modelling. The adults around the children need to be showing that they care and modelling that behaviour so that the child can take it on.
United Nations now have Sustainable Development Goals, don't they? Could you just take us through what those goals are? What are they aiming to do in the UN with these?
Okay, we've got a slide here of them. There are 17. Number one, the end of poverty, extreme poverty in the world. All of these goals are targets for international development by 2030. And they built upon the Millennium Development Goals, which had some success in terms of reducing absolute poverty, quite substantially, in fact. And that cooperation internationally is developed further in these Sustainable Development Goals. The most notable thing about them, apart from the fact that they cover so many areas of sustainability, is that they are applicable to all countries. The Millennium Goals were applicable just to those developing countries who needed the support of the rest of the world to develop. The Sustainable Development Goals are actually every country in the United Nations signed up to it, and they are all responsible to report on progress towards these 2030 goals, each one on land, on water, climate action, clean water. There isn't time to go through all of them, but this slide, I think, demonstrates the issues quite well. This model was actually produced at the time when the DFE was particularly anxious to integrate services for young children, to address the needs of the unique child holistically. And if we look at it in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, they relate directly to them. To health, to housing, to employment, to all of the influences that have a direct impact on the child's early life through their family, as well as the educational issues as well. And I was asked by C4EO a few years ago to review all the extant research in this area, to look at how the extent to which the services, the children's services were being integrated, and the evidence of what was working and what wasn't working. And it was too early for that, really. There wasn't enough working to report on. But one of the things that came up in most of the reports, in fact, was that people in all the service areas were saying the biggest problem is that we don't have a common framework of understanding. We don't have the same terms of interest or concern to make a common dialogue. I believe that sustainable development actually has that potential. It could, if we actually applied Sustainable Development Goals to early childhood education, that would provide that common framework for integration of services.
Yeah. So what would your top tips be for practitioners and educators, or anybody watching really, as to how they can investigate and implement the education for sustainable citizenship in schools or earlier settings, or even at home, John?
Well, 10 years ago, there was very little written beyond nature studies, really, but there's been a lot of writing in recent years. This book, published in 2010, is out of print, the OMEP book on education for sustainable development, but it's freely available to download, and it's still, I think, got some mileage as an introduction to the subject. So you'll find the link on the SchemaPlay publications website and various other places. There's also the SchemaPlay booklet that we produced last year, which is available on that website as well. If you're interested in the theoretical side of all of this, then working with OMEP, we produced a study of 10 countries across the world on education for sustainable development in early childhood. And there's quite a lot of theoretical analysis in there. So if you're academically interested in all of this, you'll find some answers probably to that in that book. Going beyond the books and texts and internet resources produced by UNESCO and others, I think one of the things that we believe very strongly in SchemaPlay is that practitioners learn from other practitioners more than they do from theory, and that we need to create a community of practice so that we're disseminating and sharing exemplars of good practice amongst ourselves. To that end, we've produced an award scheme which we're going to launch on May the 1st, 2019, and it's built around the idea of the child having a passport and parent involvement. So in the passport, the citizenship, sustainable citizenship passport, it includes the child's rights, the United Nations statements of their rights, and also spaces for stickers that they can collect with activities that they carry out with their parents towards their bronze, silver and gold award of sustainable citizenship. The idea is that the passport also gives them discounted entry to wildlife parks and other places that will be educational beyond the setting. That's also in the package of the award. There's an audit tool so that settings can audit their curriculum according to the 3 dimensions of sustainable development and set curriculum development targets to that end. And depending on the number of parents that are involved, they're able to apply for the award of bronze, silver or gold settings of excellence in sustainable citizenship. There are various training materials that we're going to disseminate at the same time, and we're discussing working with OMEP on this at the moment. But the rollout will happen at the conference that we're running on May the 1st in Walsall.